Alright, what's up everyone and welcome back to another episode of Joshi's Ramblings. Today, I want to talk about something that has been called the Survivability Onion. And this is, to be clear, when this first came to my attention, I thought it was kind of nonsense, just based on the name of it. But it's a real concept in real military doctrine, in particular the United States. And I want to give a shout out to Mike Askey, a strong player over in the UK, for first putting me onto this. And I will admit, when he first mentioned it, I was like, okay, real military and like 40k don't have a lot to do with each other, but this one is surprisingly applicable to the way that you actually play 40k. So, before we get into that, do you want to give a couple or we have members now. Go get this thing on the Ko-fi, and also if you join a membership, you get access to not only videos early, but you also get access to a super cool Discord. So check that out in the links below. Cool. So let's talk about what the Survivability Onion actually is. So the Survivability Onion is a concept primarily brought up from Ryan Macbeth. He talks about it in particular in the relation to tank doctrine and what you should do as a tank crew in order to stay alive in combat. And it has all these different layers, right? Starting with don't be there. So, if you're not there, you can't be shot. Don't be detected. If they don't know that you're there, then they can't do anything. Don't be acquired or identified. So, even if they know you're there, if there's like, oh, if that's a bird and not a plane, they're not going to shoot you. And this don't be hit, don't be penetrated, and don't be killed. Now, this is kind of useful for 40k. There are some directly applicable things. However, we're going to take what Ryan and other military commentators will talk about, and we're going to apply it to 40k. So we're going to be building up our own survivability onion here in 40k. And hopefully, this is really useful for you in your games. So we're going to start. we're going to start at the core. Easiest thing is don't be killed, right? This is a fairly straightforward thing. You don't die if you have remaining wounds. And so the easiest way to not be killed is if you just have a lot of wounds or a lot of attacks that they need to do, right? There's a very big difference between having one model of a guy and 20 models of a guy, because even if they shoot the 20 guys with a single lance cannon, which will do d6 plus 1 damage, even if they roll a 6, it only kills one guy. Whereas on the other extreme version of this, something like a Rogel Dorn or Super Heavy, just has a lot of wounds, and that makes it more durable. That means you can be more aggressive with it on the board. There are also ways that we can affect this, right? Things like Bullgrin with the -1 damage and the Armored Might stratagem prevent us from being killed because they only come into effect at the last step of an attack sequence. So after that, one layer out from don't be killed, don't be penetrated. And this mostly has to do with rebuilding the attack sequence. And so the don't be penetrated is, if your armor save is good, you can ignore, if you have a 3-up armor save, you're going to be ignoring 2/3 of attacks that are going to be coming in. However, of course, as everybody knows, we have the armor penetration stat, which goes against the save, and then we can use the take cover order to improve our saves. We can have the benefit of cover to improve our saves. We can have just a 2+ save or a 4-up invul, and this will help you evaluate how durable something really is. So don't be killed, but before they can kill us, don't be penetrated. If we have a really good save, the number of wounds we have matters less because they have to get through every single one of these layers. The next layer, don't be wounded. This is just a reverse engineering of the idea of the wound roll. The simplest version of it is the higher toughness relative to the strength, the harder it is to wound you, right? So, again, if you are a toughness 3, like most of our guardsmen, almost every weapon in the game is wounding a guardsman on a 3 or a 2, which means that they're going to die to almost everything, which kind of goes back to our don't be killed. The way that they stay alive is by having too many of them. But the way that something like a Bullgrin or a tank is going to stay alive is because, if you are toughness 10, like a Hellhound, and you're getting shot at by a multi-melta, which is strength 9, 2/3 of the melta attacks are not going to wound. And that means that we are going to stay alive. It's another layer that they have to get through. So beyond that, don't be hit. This is one that Guard doesn't have a lot of control over, but some other armies will have rules like stealth or stratagems that they can use to make you -1 to hit. And this is one that just kind of comes in. we can use a smokescreen stratagem to prevent hit rolls from coming in. But you can see that for everything that doesn't, if we're not hit, the other levels don't matter. Moving on from that, don't be acquired. Now this one was a bit of a stretch, honestly, but this is in particular things that have lone operative, right? It's usually not difficult to hit them. It's really not difficult to wound them most of the time. But if they can't be shot at all because you're lone operative, you're just going to survive a lot of damage, or you're going to survive a lot of potential attacks simply because they can't declare you as a target of any attacks. So things like Gaunt's Ghost and Sly Marbo have the lone operative, and then Imperial Assassins also with the lone operative. And then if you really want to take Inquisitor Draxus, you can make things lone op 18. And so that will allow you to avoid the rest of the sequence of attacks that are going to be coming in. And potentially the simplest one is don't be there, right? This is a way for you to say, you cannot hit me because I don't exist in a spot where you can see me. You can kind of mix don't be there and don't be acquired with there's an argument that staying out of line of sight belongs in the don't be acquired because you're there. You just can't shoot them because they cannot declare you as a target. But the other major way is one of the easiest ways to make sure you survive a charge is to not get charged in the first place. That's why if you watch stronger players play the game, what you'll oftentimes see is you'll be like, oh, okay, so you move 6 and you have a 12-inch charge. Okay, I'm going to measure out from the distance from your models, and I'm going to be 18.1 inches away from your models. So it is not possible for you to charge me, right? But there are ways that we can play with that. The reverse of that is, let's say we are there, but we're really not wounded. We're really not worried about getting wounded. Let's say that we have Bulgrin, which are toughness 6, and they're going to charge in with something that is strength 3. That's wounding us on 6s. We don't care as much. We just need to have at least one of these layers of the onion be something that our opponent is not going to be dealing with. That's why invulnerable saves are so valuable, because it is so late that even if they do all of the right steps, they're still going to lose half of their effectiveness on a 4-up invul. So, with all of this in mind, this is a basic idea of how you can keep your models alive and what it is that you need to do. So, we kind of reverse engineer different things from here. So, the first thing is, if we're not there, let's say we're Scions, right? We can deep strike in. We're not there. You can't even shoot us with your indirect fire because we're going to be dropping out of the sky. However, we don't want to be hit. We don't want to be wounded. Is there anything that we can do to prevent any of these steps from going into our models? And so we're going to take a couple of examples to try and reverse engineer this in real time. So we have to remember that we're not the only ones playing with the survivability onion. We have to do that with our opponents as well. And so one of the major things that we kind of had to think about is what parts of the onion are guard good at getting through, what parts do we struggle getting through, and do we have tools to mitigate those issues? So before I come up with an example answer, I want you to just kind of think, you can pause the video for a couple seconds, think about what is it that guard is good at and what do we kind of struggle with. So an easy example, let's take a look at the Leman-Russ Battle Cannon. The Leman-Russ Battle Cannon, if we look at, can you see my mouse? No. All right, whatever. At the level of, if we can see them and we can actually shoot at them, we hit half the time, right? But we can improve that with a couple of different ways. We can use Daring Recon from a Scout Sentinel to get reroll 1s, and so we are going to get more attacks through the Don't Be Hit category. And then we also have access to the Take Aim order, which can suddenly go from half of our attacks hitting to 2/3 of our attacks hitting. And that's a fairly significant increase. So that's one way that we can minimize that one. Don't be wounded. Guard has a couple of really good tools to get through this layer of the onion. The first one is we have lethal hits from the Leman-Russ Battle Cannon into anything that's a vehicle or monster. So that is roughly equivalent to +1 to wound, give or take. And we also just have strength 10. So we are going to be a higher strength than almost anything that is not a vehicle or monster. And then we have lethal hits into things that are vehicles or monsters. So we don't generally have issues with the don't be wounded part of this. We're pretty good at getting through the don't be hit, pretty good at getting through the don't be wounded. Then we get to our next spot, which is one of the weak parts of the Leman Russ Battle Cannon, which is that it is AP1 and it does not ignore cover. So anything that is a Space Marine, which has a 3+ save, we're generally putting it on a 4+ if it's not in cover, and more realistically, we're putting it on a 3+ still, which is our major problem. However, Guard has a lot of tools to circumvent this particular example. We have Hellhounds, which can ignore cover, which is functionally AP. We have Exterminators, which can give us bonus AP. And we can give Fields of Fire, which also is bonus AP. So we have a really good opportunity to minimize the weakest part of this weapon, which is that it has low AP. And then we get to the last part, which is Don't Be Killed. We're damage 3. Against most targets, this is a really effective damage number to be at, because Marines are damage 2, so even if they have a 5 appeal no pain, we're still usually killing them. Most Terminators have 3 wounds. Against most vehicles, this is effectively rolling average on a melt shot most of the time. And the only thing that really gives us trouble with damage 3 is anything that has -1 to wound, and something that has 4 wounds. So things like Deathwing Knights are rather annoying to actually try and punch through. So with that, let's go ahead and do one more example. We're going to talk about the Basilisk. And we can kind of look at what we can do with a Basilisk. In general, if our opponent is on the board, our Basilisk has, what is it? It's like 240-inch range, like a 20-foot range. If they're on the board, we can hit them. So, don't be there. If they're on the board, we can hit them. Don't be acquired. Well, we have indirect fire, so we can still actually go for attacks on them. That's not something where they can just hide out of line of sight. However, the third part of the onion, don't be hit, is where the Basilisk starts to run into some problems, especially with the recent changes in Pariah Nexus, where it will never hit on anything better than a 4. So, we can kind of struggle here. Don't be wounded. The Basilisk at Strength 8 into most targets that it wants to shoot at, which are mostly infantry, we're going to be winning on 2s and 3s, which is great. So, this is still another spot where we get most of our attacks through this layer of the onion. Don't be penetrated. I don't know why I put a green check mark here. It probably ought to have been a yellow circle, but this one is where we oftentimes run into trouble, because at AP2, Basilisk shooting indirectly suddenly is AP1 because they have cover. But we do have ways to deal with that as well, as we talked about with the Battle Cannon. Lastly, don't be killed. Damage 2 is really good into things like Marines, but it's not necessarily particularly useful against Terminators. It's not really useful against a lot of vehicles. And even something like 5 Scourges, which is a very common unit that we have to be able to deal with in Dark Eldar right now, or Drukhari, it doesn't have the volume of fire to fully kill the unit. However, we do have a way to alleviate that. What if we bring a second Basilisk? Suddenly, we're so good at getting through every other part of the onion that if we just double the number of shots by bringing a second unit, suddenly we're killing the things that we would not want to otherwise. As we kind of talked about, we can alleviate some of this with direct firing, so we can hit even more often by direct firing. We can improve our penetration with Fields of Fire, Exterminators, and Hellhounds, and we can improve our ability to kill things by having a sufficient volume of fire. There are lots of ways to apply the Survivability Onion to your game of 40k, right? And there are lots of ways that we can try and exploit all of these different concepts. One of the things that we'll oftentimes talk about, and you'll hear in our tactical debrief episodes with people like Nassim Fouchain and Dr. Kyle McCord, if you need to put something on objective, you have a couple of options. One, you can hide your guys behind a wall so that they're not visible in the first place. And so we can avoid the don't be acquired. They can't shoot us. Next, if we have to be out in the open and we know that they're going to be out in the open, well, we don't generally want to put just like one guardsman on there, because that guardsman is going to die. However, if we put one guardsman on the point and he's got 19 buddies behind him that we can kill those guys before the guy on the point dies, suddenly that guy is very likely to be alive at the end of it. Just way more appealing. Alternatively, we can also use something like a Leman Russ or a Hellhound, which is difficult for a lot of armies to take down right on the point, and dare our opponents to try and deal with the wounding and penetrating and actually killing of a toughness 11 2+ save 13 wound model. But the other part of it is we can exploit it in the other way as well. So going back to reverse engineering it, if we have a unit like Bulgrim, which is incredibly durable against a lot of melee threats because of the damage -1, Bulgrim are usually not going to die. A 6-man Bulgrim, there is not a lot of units in the game, and not even a lot of combinations of units that are going to kill 6 Bulgrim in one turn. So what you can generally do is you can put them out there and say, sure, I know I'm going to lose 5 Bulgrim in this spot, but if we can set it up such that anything that comes out to hit our Bulgrim, we now can acquire them. That means we now can hit them and wound them, penetrate them, and kill them. That is a massive way. So use your Bulgrim, use your Hellhounds, use your Chimeras, use your Catachan, and put them where if you know they are going to die, where they are going to force our opponents to come into the Onion. We force our opponents to be targets based on where we put them. And that's something that you can think about a lot in your games. Maybe you don't want to put a guy 1 inch back from the wall. Maybe you want to put him 2 inches back from the wall so that any charge he goes for will force your opponents to come onto our side of the wall such that we can see them. Just something to think about. Anyway, this is Joushi just rambling about this is just me rambling about the Survivability Onion. Hopefully this is useful. If you have more questions about it, let me know. It is just a rough framework more than anything else, but it's hopefully useful to think about how your units are surviving, what you can do to make them more survivable, and also what you can generally do even in your narrative and crusade games to set yourself up for success. Put your guys in cover, make them harder to be penetrated, bring more of them so that they don't all die and you just have a couple of guys still left in the unit. It's still very applicable to all levels of 40k. So with that, anyway, hope this video has been useful to all you guys, and we'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.